Right, okay, welcome back everybody. Before I talk about our next session, I just wanted to say Tony Walsh, there he is, just walking in the door, is around until after lunch, and we are, like I say, trialling our merchandise opportunity. So we'll be doing this cooperate and you can change the world, which will be our theme for Co-op Fortnight. So if you want to buy posters of those, but get them signed from Tony, you've got a few hours at lunch to do that. But as I was saying earlier, it's tough times generally here in the UK and globally, but it's also been tough times for our cooperative movement. You know, one of the things, over 180 years of operating this business model, one of the things we always talk about is resilience in the cooperative movement and that member piece around resilience. But our next session asks some difficult questions, because cooperatives are built on trust and accountability and shared values, and those principles come under real pressure, more so, and a great level of scrutiny, more so than in traditional organisations, because we do stand by those. And we're going to be hearing on this next panel from people who face those challenges, or currently facing those challenges, because one of the things about cooperatives, quite a lot of us have got the same word in our business titles. So even though we might not be trading together, there is a direct impact often in the movement itself. So, in those moments of challenge, what must we change? What must we endure? And how do we become more resilient, transparent, and trusted? So this session is going to be hosted by our well-respected and renowned journalist of the cooperative movement, Rebecca Harvey, who is executive editor of Co-op News. And Rebecca is joined by Maria Cearns, who's the chief operating officer of the Cooperative Bank, who've not been without their challenges over the years, but I think Maria has lived through them all. We've got Amanda Newton, CEO of Rochdale Boroughwide Housing, fairly new CEO, again, came in to face some real challenges, and I've been really proud of the work that we've done, and our Society Secretary Claire in particular has done with work with Rochdale Boroughwide Housing to support those governance structures. And the much loved and trusted Russell Gill, head of member and cooperative engagement at the Cooperative Group. So can we welcome our panel to the stage, and Rebecca, over to you. Thank you.
Right, hello everyone, and it's great to see the room so full actually, because I know there's a few other panels going on at the same time. As Rose kindly introduced us, when the going gets tough, the tough does get going. And for the people on this panel, it doesn't mean you run away. It means you really step up and you make a difference for your business, for your community as well. So Maria, Amanda, Russell, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to start with the Co-op Bank, Maria, because a lot of you in the room will know and remember a bit of its recent history. But for those who don't, I'm going to give a very, very brief history lesson. So the bank was founded in 1872, and it began as the Loans and Deposit Department of the Co-op Wholesale Society, CWS. In 1992, it became the first UK high street bank to publish a customer-led ethical policy, which basically said what it could and couldn't lend to. So it refused to lend to arms manufacturers, to companies involved on animal testing for cosmetics, and tobacco companies. In 2009, it merged with Britannia Building Society, which left a really toxic commercial property loan, and that on its balance sheet. And that really came to a head in 2012 when it failed in a bid to buy over 600 Lloyds branches, and a year later discovered a £1.5 billion shortfall. So there were resignations, investigations, there were scandals. But the really interesting part in all of this is that right in the middle of the crisis in 2013, the bank incorporated its ethical policy into its constitution, which is really important because in the end the bank was saved by a bail-in from hedge funds. In 2015, it actually strengthened its ethical policy, and in 2022, the year of its 150th anniversary, it posted its first annual profits. And in 2024, it was purchased by Coventry Building Society. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of where we're up to now. It's been a crazy couple of decades, but one person who has lived through all of this is Maria Cearns. So Maria, You were COO of the bank and now you're Transformation Director at Coventry Building Society Group. Things really did get tough for the bank. So when did you first join and what was it like to witness this crisis from the inside?
Yeah, it's quite a lot to listen to that story, that introduction, to be honest. So I joined the bank in 2001. And I can remember very clearly the moments that I really wanted to work at the Co-operative Bank. So I was sat in the Printworks, which is a big cinema complex just next door to our current head office. And I was watching a film and an advert came on for the bank's ethical policy. And at the time I was doing a graduate training job for just a normal bank. And I remember sitting there and thinking, that is the bank I want to work for. That's where I want to be. The ethical policy was the thing that really motivated me to try and get a job at the Co-op Bank. And with great joy, I joined early in 2002 as a current account product manager. And we had an absolutely tremendous first kind of 7 years. We'd kind of come out of the financial crisis completely unscathed. There's a lot of talk about a kind of flight to trust. We had, a lot of current account customers joining us because we were definitely different. And then I think, as you say, things took a turn for the worse. And actually what the bank faced was an existential crisis. An organisation that had been set up to bank the cooperative movement suddenly found itself absolutely isolated on its own, no ability to kind of fund itself, and what was it going to be? So we really faced, I think, probably one of the biggest crises certainly the bank had ever experienced, but actually even within the movement it was a fairly significant one.
It was. And I think, just go back to the ethical policy, because I'm really fascinated about this bit, because some people thought it might be quietly dropped in the middle of all that, but it wasn't. And to you, what does that say about the relationship between ethics and survival in a cooperatively led organisation?
So I think the two are absolutely intertwined. Capital rescues balance sheets, and you can't step away from there was a capital black hole that needed filling, and the capital did save that aspect of it, but conviction saved the institution. So for those colleagues that stayed, and I know many of you in the room, those customers that kept faith with the idea that ethics was really important to us. That is what really saved the bank. We took a decision. Hedge funds are at their heart very rational people, and we could evidence through data that our customers had come to us because of ethics, our customers were staying because of ethics, and actually our colleagues were here because they wanted to protect something. And that kind of ability to really articulate. We put the ethical policy within the articles of constitution, so the actual basis of what the business was. And that meant it was protected. That meant all the way through the kind of traumatic recovery years that followed, we could never step away from those commitments we made. We had some wonderful friends in the cooperative movement during that journey, Rose and Co-ops UK being the kind of leading supporter of us. And they really helped. They helped hold us to account. They helped us establish a matrix. We had a cooperative matrix that we ensured we met every single quarter. That meant we as a kind of cooperative bank team had to justify exactly why we felt we could still call ourselves a cooperative name. So I think actually, capital's really important. Of course it is. It's really important that you have people who can fund you. But actually, conviction is the thing that protects you. It's the thing that means once you come out of the kind of really difficult moments, that there was something there that was meaningful. So for me, having spent 10 years in a fantastic cooperative family, 10 years in a very, very difficult, challenging, painful environment where we had to be really thoughtful about everything we did and what we did and why we did it, to now find ourselves in a place where the cooperative bank has been bought by a mutual. It's just a beautiful arc to our story. And I think this whole session, which is what happens in a crisis, what can happen in a crisis is with the right people and the right customers and the right colleagues and the right ethics and the right supporters, you can come out stronger than you ever were. I mean, I sit in an organisation, we cut the ribbon on our 4th floor in our Manchester head office this week. Completely refurbished floors, absolutely state-of-the-art technology for customers. All our branches are having a full refresh. We're investing money in our digital capability. That wouldn't have been able to happen without the recovery and without the crisis.
So you talked a lot about supporters there, and that is really vital. And one of your big supporters was the Save Our Bank campaign.
Absolutely.
So what was your relationship like with them?
I can see our welcome. Thank you very much, Rob. Our Save Our Bank campaign were amazing from the very beginning all the way through. The Save Our Bank campaign was established by a group of customers who brought themselves together to say, we want to save this organisation. We want to protect the cooperative bank. It is the only ethical alternative on the high street, and we want it to remain. I can remember meeting Rob and the team almost on the kind of the very first beginning meetings. So I think I met when they first started. And obviously, the thing that can be really lovely is there is a real symmetry. So as a cooperative bank colleague who's been at the organisation for a quarter of a century, who joined because I wanted to work in an organisation that was cooperative, to meet customers who wanted to stand up for us and really shout and protect us, it was wonderful. It was almost like having a kind of internal and external holding hands through a really difficult recovery journey. And Save Our Bank were fantastic. They are now our customer union. We are the only high street bank with a fully recognised customer union. And they're a really important part of our group. Whenever there is any announcements at work, I will always speak to the Save Our Bank and customer union teams first. They were there all the way through the hard times, and we're really grateful for it. I think they played a huge role in our kind of recovery and survival. And we're really appreciative. And I think what they can show is that when people come together and stand together and join together for the right reasons, amazing things can happen.
We'll come back to the name thing in a minute, because I think that's a really interesting question. But just quickly before we move on to Rochdale, let's talk about hedge funds, because hedge funds are these big bad things, that are in America and they're really bad. But you went to hedge funds rather than the public purse. So how did you balance that conundrum between trying to bring in capital and keep your values?
Yeah, and it's not easy. So I think most people would probably expect somebody to stand up and be critical of hedge funds, and I'm absolutely not. The hedge funds came to our aid when we really needed it. So, there was a will and a desire from customers and colleagues and the British population to save the cooperative bank. But you can't do that without £1.5 billion. And actually raising those funds from hedge funds, it was the only place we had to go. We did some interesting things along that journey. So, embedding the Articles of Association that meant the ethical policy was enshrined in who we were, meant we could maintain our ethics whilst working with what are, very clever, money-focused, financially driven institutions. And actually, we came to the end of that journey, and I would look back and say there's lots of things we learned through that 10 years working with the hedge funds, which we will keep. There's lots of intelligent and sensible things that we have embedded in our organisation. But the most important thing is we're back to where we should always be, which is a mutually owned bank that is on the high streets, that is delivering a service that other financial services businesses can't do. And I think, much of this is, I often talk about when you work at the cooperative bank, your objectives are not about how you managed that year. It's not about what you delivered that month or that quarter. It's about being able to look back and say, did I look after that institution in the time that I was in there? Was I a custodian of the values? If I look back to the Rochdale pioneers, would they tap me on the shoulder and say, you did your best? Or would they say, what did you do? And I think that's the way in which we all look at our time with the cooperative bank. We are trying to protect something. And what the crisis shows is with the right people and the right supporters and the right customers, you can achieve anything.
Thanks,
Right, let's go to Rochdale now. So I'm going to give you another short history lesson. It's the last one, I promise. So Rochdale Boroughwide Housing was launched 15 years ago, and the tenant vote for mutualisation was held at 8 p.m. on the 21st of December, which some of you will recognise as the anniversary of the opening of the Rochdale Pioneers Toad Lane store. It was hailed as the first tenant and employee-owned mutual housing society. But in 2020, a 2-year-old boy, Awab Ishaq, died in an RBH property, and the coroner ruled that his death was caused by prolonged exposure to mould in his home. Lawyers accused RBH of failing for several years to treat the mould and accused them of racial discrimination as well. The CEO at the time was sacked. There was an investigation by the Housing Ombudsman that found deep-rooted problems around repairs, records and data security. In 2022, Yvonne Arrowsmith came in as the interim CEO and spoke with tenants, visited homes and met with staff and stakeholders. And in autumn 2023, RBH tenant and employee members approved a set of really big rule changes aimed at strengthening governance and returning the mutual to regulatory compliance. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later, because around this time, Amanda Newton was appointed as permanent CEO. I'm delighted you're with us today, Amanda. Thank you for joining us. Tell us about your first day at Rochdale Boroughwide Housing. What were you walking into?
So it depends what you call my first day. So I remember vividly the phone call from the chairman that said, would you like to be our CEO? And it was on the 1st of June, really hot afternoon on the 1st of June. I'd been for an interview earlier that day. And I don't know, it was really one of those really profound moments in your life where you think, blimey, you know, it's mine now. I was working with another housing association at the time. I needed to work my notice, but realistically, I started working with Yvonne from the 2nd of June, really, because nobody needed me to turn up in September and go, what are we doing then? And I remember again vividly that Yvonne said to me, the only thing you need to know, Amanda, is everything's broken. And it's like, okay. So walking into RBH didn't happen on a particular day. It was kind of a segue into the organisation. But what you get a feel for as a CEO when you walk into an organisation and you go and focus in on what are the customers saying, what are the colleagues saying, what are the stakeholders saying, is that I had inherited an organisation that was fundamentally damaged, completely broken. Awab Ishaq died in 2020, 2 days after his 2nd birthday. And then COVID hit. So it all went very quiet because inquests into deaths had such a long backlog with everything that happened in COVID. And the organisation kind of carried on. And the majority of our staff didn't know that a 2-year-old child had died in one of our homes. So what I walked into was a bunch of colleagues who had been absolutely blindsided by their employer, the person that they turn up for every day, the organisation that they trust, and they do their best for every single day, to find out on Sky News on the morning that it broke in November that this had happened in one of our homes. Very few people knew what had happened. We then had a bunch of customers who were frightened because they're thinking, is it going to be me next? Are my children safe? And Yvonne had very, very carefully opened the doors to RBH, which had, and I'm giving you my opinion now because I wasn't there, but which had been closed for a long, long time. And the kind of floodgates opened in terms of people going, can you help me? I've got this problem. I have damp and mould in my home, or I don't, but I'm scared that I might. So a really scared bunch of customers. Colleagues were equally terrified. They're walking out on the streets in Rochdale with our uniforms on, driving our vans, and there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of anger about what had happened. We had our contact centre receiving death threats. We had our operatives challenged in their vans. It was a very, very difficult time. From a stakeholder perspective, a lot of the stakeholder relationships had been damaged over time, but this absolutely shattered them. And we were in the eye of the media. It was a constant media frenzy. I arrived, my official start date was the 18th of September. And we immediately started planning for the first anniversary of the inquest because we knew that there was going to be significant public interest around that again. So you find yourself as a new CEO thrust into live TV and live radio, which is kind of scary when you've not done it before. But
Yeah.
being asked really important questions like, how do you feel about leading a racist organisation? So it was a lot.
It sounds like a lot. It does sound like an awful lot. I mean, you said, you came in, everything was broken. I mean, what had happened to get to a mutual organisation that was set up with all this fanfare to the point where everything is broken?
I think we'd absolutely lost sight of what was important, and that is the people who live in our homes, the people behind our front doors. We'd started to shift into building new homes. Really important for a housing association to build new homes. There is no question about that, but not at the expense of the homes that you already own and the people behind the front doors of those homes. We'd stopped investing in our existing homes, which was, and we're a stock transfer, so we took out all of our, what was 12,500 homes at the time from the council in 2012, and with stock transfers, for anyone that's not familiar, you have a 5-year investment programme, and that kind of happened and was signed off. But then the investment in our existing homes really slowed down. So you started to see homes that were constructed in the 1960s around that time really deteriorating. And just to give you a sense of quantum of that, in the 3 years before I arrived, we invested around between £3 and £5 million in our existing homes every year. In the last 2 years and this year, we will have invested and will invest between 25 and 30 million pounds in our homes just to catch up. And we'll be doing that for probably the next 5 years. So the financial impact of this has been incredibly, incredibly serious for us. And I think, we'd moved away from what was important. We have, in our constitution, we have a board of directors, we have a representative body which is made up of members who are colleagues and members who are customers. We have 8 colleagues and 15 customers on our representative body. And they'd got into a role of simply rubber stamping things that had been produced in the wider organisation, rather than being part of those ongoing discussions and that dialogue and building what the right thing is for the organisation. And I think, your question around how do you fix it, it's like 3 years of really, really hard graft, for one. We'd abandoned our corporate strategy. And I think there's something really interesting that occurred to me on my first day was, what does our corporate strategy say, but what does it look like? There wasn't a single picture of a human being in the corporate strategy. It was cartoons. And that, for me, just said everything that you needed to know about who are you here to serve. And it's those kind of really tiny things that tell you about the culture of an organisation. So we ripped that up and we wrote a new corporate strategy that we developed with our customers, with our colleagues, and with input from our stakeholders. We also developed a new set of values. So our values, our organisational values at the time, were like a textbook, cooperative mutual textbook. So, we will be pioneering, and that's really important that we are, but you don't need to write it down. And people didn't know what that meant they needed to do. Our plumber who goes into the home and fixes a tap doesn't know how he does that in a pioneering way, but he does know how he does it in a way that cares about our customers, about the people who are behind the front doors. So we reframed a whole new set of values that we worked with our customers and our colleagues on. And the way to make sure that you've got that right is to sense check that back and go back to people and go, you told us this, here are your words, does this feel right? And that's kind of underpinned everything that we do now in terms of our values are really simple. Working as one, we do what we say, really simple stuff, but stuff that matters.
Brilliant. And let's go back to the rep body, because the representative body, it was a core part of the recovery plan. And a shout out to Claire Dalton, who's over there, so Co-op's UK chair, who was the interim independent chair, who came in and sorted a lot of this out, and she's now still an independent advisor. The recovery plan involved transferring quite a lot of powers from the rep body back to the board. And there's a question here of scrutiny and accountability. So I remember at the time, at the time, Tony Lloyd said it would remove powers from tenants' employees, and this was a really bad thing. So what's your view on all of that?
I remember getting Tony's letter when I actually did the rule change. It was one of the first things that I did. We had a set of rules which gave all of the accountability for setting strategy, for appointing the board, for removing the board, all of the things that should sit with the governing body, with people who have the accountability and hold things like, building safety, sat with our representative body. And that's a democratic process to appoint our representative body. They are incredibly important to us. They do a great job. But should they be accountable for our 7 high-rise and the building safety requirements in there? No, they absolutely should not. That should be appointed people who are part of a board. So the rule changes that we did, I remember Tony saying you're demutualising this organisation by stealth, and it was like that was not the intention. The intention was to transfer the accountabilities for really important things that can end up in corporate manslaughter to the people who should own that responsibility, so to the board, whilst not disempowering the representative body and putting them into a space where they can make a really, really positive contribution to the organisation. And I'll give you an example of why the rules were completely wrong. When everything happened and Awar Bishak's inquest happened, there was, you'll remember it, for those of you that saw this playing out in the media, one of the biggest governance failures in RBH was that the fact that the Secretary of State at the time, Michael Gove, had to come up and remove the Chief Executive because the board were undecided. We will, we won't, we will, we won't. The board had to be removed as well. And the role of removing the board sat with the representative body. So some fairly junior staff and a bunch of customers. And they just did not feel empowered to do that. And actually, I don't think they even realised that they needed to do that, and which is why it played out in the way it did. So we transferred the accountability for setting strategy and the accountability for appointing board members based on skills needed to take the organisation forward away from the rep body and to the board. But what we did do was made the role of the rep body really meaningful. So they are now our formal scrutiny body, and they do an amazing job in terms of looking at our business, looking at the places where we might not be doing too well. They use data and they go, actually, we'd like to go and have a look here. And they have access to everything in our business in terms of understanding how we're performing. They can go and look at any data that they want, apart from really sensitive employee data, but any data they want. And they've done a brilliant job for us over the last couple of years in they do 3 scrutiny reviews for us each year, which are massive deep dives into certain parts of the business. So the important stuff, how do we communicate with our customers about a repair? And they are now, I always talk about 3 cogs. There are 3 cogs that make this business move forward. There's the board, there's the rep body, and there's the executive. And if one of those isn't working, then none of them can. And that's kind of landed. So they're in the right space now, under the right rules.
Brilliant. One thing I've heard you say before, and I know you've written online before, is the fact that anything is possible with the right cause, the right team, and the right culture. And is that's something you really apply to RBH?
Yeah, I mean, everybody needs to understand their dance space, in my view. And my message to the organisation is, we all own everything. And they're going, yeah, but you're the CEO, Amanda. And it's like, yeah, I am. And I understand my role, and you understand your role. The difference between me and a lot of other people is I get fired first if it all goes spectacularly wrong. But we all own everything. And I remember when I first arrived, I sat down with one of the damp and mould team at the time and just said, he was talking to me about something, and I can't even remember what it was now, but my question to him was, what does that mean for the customer? And he kind of looked at me and said, that's a really good question. Well, it's the only one I'll ever ask you. So we've really pushed through what does that mean for the customer? It's a really simple question that has many, many complex answers based on what you're doing. But it feels like a customer-driven culture inside our business now, because they are the people that are important. And the customers today, but also the ones that will follow as well. So we have really reframed that culture away from feeling distant from the people who live behind our front doors. And the one thing I'm really proud of is we always said that we'd only ever know that any of the interventions that we did in our recovery and beyond was when the people behind the front door started telling us that. So we have something that our regulator prescribes, which is called tenant satisfaction measures. And there are 20 odd of them, but 12 of these are perception measures. And RBH has gone from lower quartile to upper quartile in most of those measures in the last 3 years. And that's important.
Super important. Thank you, Amanda. That's brilliant. Russell, Co-op group. So co-op group has been around a really, really long time, and I'm not going to do a history lesson here, but instead let Russell talk about everything. Because while last year's cyber crisis was big and it's bad and it's most fresh in people's minds, and we will talk about it in a minute, it's not the first rough thing that the group has faced, and I'm sure it won't be the last. So Russell, you're now head of corporate reach, and how long have you been at the organisation, and what are some of the most challenging things you've seen the organisation go through?
Hi everybody. So I am now coming up year 35, so that's quite a long time. And sadly, as I look around the room, I see some people who I recognise from year one, so I'm not the only one, as well as some great new co-operators, so it's nice to see such a mix here. I think over those years, there have been some tremendous highs, some real successes, some things that every time energise you and think, actually, this movement is something that is something to be really proud of, both in terms of the movement collectively, but also individually within the co-op group as well. But I would say what's also characterised that all those years is that things do happen. Problems do occur. Sometimes they are self-inflicted. Sometimes they are the result of circumstances beyond your control. But actually what really matters isn't how you try and micromanage each one of those things. It's about how you respond and how you try and learn from them. Now, I guess when I go back to my very, very early days, it was things that were really existential. There was an attempt to demutualize the CWS. There were people who turned out to be criminals on the board at a senior level. And that could have been catastrophic for the organisation. But I actually think what that episode provided were the seeds that led to the Co-operative Commission, that in many ways inspired so many of the positive developments that characterised the early part of this century. So I think my learning throughout all of my time really is that there will be tough times. I'm really struck, and I couldn't agree more with Rose's introductory comments about actually there's something about resilience, there's something about remembering who we are, about those values and principles that give us the guide lanes. Remember who we're doing this for. Those are the sorts of things that we need to stay true to when we're facing its challenges. And I guess the other thing is to say is I think the true measure of any type of organisation, whether they call themselves a brand or a movement or whatever else, isn't how you deal with things in the good times. It's how you deal with things when things are tough. And I think there's been plenty of occasions for me where that's been the case, to sit alongside the happy days as well.
The demutualisation, that was the Lanarkshire crisis. Because I'd never heard of this. I mean, I've been with Co-op News since 2013. I had not heard of this. So what happened?
Well, I suppose, and it's interesting sitting next to Maria, because actually for those of us who were around in the sort of the 1990s, 1980s, the whole thing about demutualisation was a big thing. It was free money that at the time when public services were being privatised, the whole denationalisation, etc. One of the additional tricks that was putting money in people's pockets was demutualising the building society sector and the like. And a particular individual who'd had some dealings with the then CWS, a chap called Andrew Reagan, thought that actually there was money to be had by persuading co-op members that if they demutualised the CWS, they'd all get a few pennies, but then the real people who would benefit from that would be those people who would be able to benefit from a new privately owned co-op. He managed to recruit some senior executives within the organisations to his cause. Senior executives who, incidentally, ultimately were prosecuted criminally, and in a way that Andrew Reagan, who started this whole, managed to get away largely scot-free. The former co-op execs who sort of were his people on the inside didn't. But I think the real story behind this is the saviour of the movement from this attempt to demutualise was really actually people within the movement who knew what to do. In particular, the then chief executive, Graham Melmoth, really fought tooth and nail to demonstrate that actually we were an organisation that didn't want to demutualise, demonstrated the reason why our cooperative status was so important. But then really importantly, once we'd seen off Andrew Reagan, saw that actually this has happened because we weren't demonstrating member value in as positive a way as we should do. And that's what led to so much of the work around the Co-operative Commission and the importance of reinvigorating cooperative membership, which in many ways has been the thing that's guided my career for much of the time I've worked with the co-op. So it could have been truly disastrous. And let's face it, had the CWS demutualised, that would have been hugely problematic for just about everybody in this room. I'm not sure we would have been sat here right now had that been the case. The fact that at the time co-op leaders were able to go back to their values and principles, fight for what they believe with, and see off this threat was really, really important.
So do you think that's the secret to co-op resilience, the values and principles?
Oh, for sure. I mean, they provide the guide rails, undoubtedly. I think there's also something about recognising who you are doing this for. You know, you're doing it for our members. Many of our members are also our colleagues, so I think being very focused on the interests of our colleagues is really important too. But I think there is also something as well about the cooperative model and the ability to take a long view. So whenever we have bumps in the road, I often say to people, you know, we need to absolutely face into it, do the right thing, but these things will pass. The organisation is resilient, it's built to be resilient, and it's not just in my era that there have been challenges. I guess if there was somebody was talking about the epoch 30 years before that or before that, they would have equivalent tales to tell. There's something about the cooperative model that means we're built to survive.
We have to talk about cyber, because obviously that is the biggest challenge that the group has faced recently. And it didn't just affect the group, of course, but so many of the independent societies through FRTS as well. So what happened? How did you get to that point?
Well, look, let's be clear about this. This was a crime, okay? So this was a criminal act against the co-op. So there are occasions where we score own goals and do things wrong. But this was a malicious attack on our society and our movement. And actually it was happening simultaneously with other malicious attacks on other retailers as well. And indeed, this is not a problem that anybody has solved. This will continue to happen. There are bad actors who see cybercrime as being a key way in which they can potentially make money and cause disruption. We were in a position where we actually spotted what was going on perhaps somewhat earlier than some of our competitors. I think, unfortunately for M&S, they were already in M&S and in their systems before they'd really picked it up. It was late April, we actually spotted that there was some unusual activity, fairly quickly found that there had been some access to some information, but the criminals hadn't actually managed to penetrate the Co-ops Group systems. So actually, a lot of the disruption that was caused was because of the deliberate act to collapse the Co-ops Group systems, to in many ways destroy the Co-op Group systems in order to avoid the cyber criminals penetrating the internal workings of the organisation. That meant, for example, that there would never have been any question of ransoms or similar. If you ask a similar question to some of the other large corporates about how they have responded to this, they can't and won't give a direct answer in terms of whether ransoms were paid. We were in the position where we didn't even have to face that question because the criminals were kept outside. Nonetheless, it caused the most enormous disruption, not just to the Co-op Group, but to the independent societies who also relied upon many of the services that we provided, and actually caused enormous disruption to the operation of the business. I think what I would say is that very early on, we were quite clear about the need to be as open and transparent and as honest about what was happening with our colleagues who were having to face this on the front line, with our members, because ultimately we are an organisation that does rely upon trust. It was really important that people recognised that although some of the basic data had been lost and picked up by those criminals, we needed to tell people that had been the case. We also needed to tell people that there would be a temporary loss of service, and that had an impact for many people in this room, not least for those of the communities that we serve where the co-op is the lifeline store. So we needed to try and explain and be open and straightforward about what was going on. I think a couple of other builds that I would add. I think the measure of an organisation is somehow how you, sometimes how you face into things under the greatest of scrutiny. Now, we were in an interesting position in that we got called to Parliament. We were sat before a select committee. We had Co-op Group representatives, where we had our General Counsel, Dom, who many of you will know, and our head of IT and Digital, there before the Commons to explain in as clear a sense as possible what we had done, what the lessons we might learn from, and I think we tried to be as transparent as we possibly could. We were sat alongside a competitor who was going through a different thing, whose approach was to be a little bit more guarded and a little more closed in terms of what they were sharing, and I think that says something about openness and transparency. I think the other thing that I would say is, and many of you will see this on the telly, our then CEO at the time, Cearns, went and did the media, and she did it with a social enterprise called the Hacking Games. The Hacking Games was a project that was about recognizing that many of tomorrow's hackers are today's young people who are gamers, who are attracted to hacking through very simple things like just trying to get some free credits on the games. And so actually the importance of educating young people, both about the perils of the world of hacking, but also that there are careers and there are futures in people who want to learn more about digital expertise, was a positive that could have come out of this. So there's something for me as well about how you can take positive steps out of the most difficult of situations. Now, I can't pretend that cyber has been anything other than an awful episode, not just for the Co-op Group, for other independent societies as well. I hope that we're on the road to recovery as a business now, and I believe that actually there's been some important lessons learned, both about how to respond to that sort of crime, but also perhaps about how to deal with crises as and when they come, because sure as anything, they will happen in the future.
Death, taxes and crises.
Indeed, indeed.
I think I'm really glad to hear about the Hacking Games, because I remember reading that the people who were ultimately arrested for this were in their late teens and early 20s. It's really, really young people who are doing this disruption. And I know you do some linking with the academies as well through the Hacking Games, which is great. One more question, Russell, and I'm going to ask Amanda and Maria this too, but it's about like branding and identity, because like you said, the Co-op is the biggest co-op in the UK. It's what most people think of when you say the co-op. You think of the food store. So is there a question here of like reputation risk contagion? Like, how do you manage that?
Well, I think it's about recognising your responsibility, it's part of what I do every day to remind people that that actually anything that the Co-op Group does can have impacts and can have a ripple effect. Certainly on our other retail society colleagues, but actually for a movement as a whole. And I know frequently when something significant happens, you know, one of the conversations we often have is with Rose about the potential impact, and often it's sort of met with what can we do to help, what can we do to support. Now, I'm not naive enough to know that on occasions the Co-op Group does things that feel clumsy and on occasions put other societies in a difficult position and other cooperatives thinking, why has this happened? What I would also say is that there are many instances where there's a positive halo effect from not just the Co-op Group, but from all of us working together. And I think what this says to me is that as a movement, we have to recognise that mutual dependency we have on one another. And when there are problems and issues, go back to that Co-op value of solidarity and actually standing next to one another and supporting each other through the tough times and celebrating when there are great things that we all achieve.
Thank you. Maria, so you mentioned it in passing about like the Co-op Bank keeping its name throughout this whole time, even though they had no mutual association whatsoever. How much did the name matter to you? Because I remember there was a discussion at the time, and I think someone said that in the end, the decision whether or not you could keep the cooperative name, because it's not protected, the word cooperative, sat with the BEIS department. So what was going through the bank at that time?
So cooperative is the most important part of our name. You know, we are a cooperative bank. We've always been a cooperative bank. You know, I mean, actually very similar to the way Russell described it. One of the worst things about the bank's crisis was that, you know, awful dawning realization that you have damaged a movement that's really important to you. And actually, one of the things that I think, you know, you can come out of crises as better, stronger, fitter organisations with a real realisation of what you're about. And I think what the bank's crisis taught us was how important being a cooperative was to us. And actually, we spent a decade trying our best to be like the poster child of the cooperative movement. We wanted to evidence to you and to ourselves and to our customers, and you know, with Save Our Bank acting as our kind of constant conscience, that we were worthy of the name. So actually, I think it's really important, and I think to Russell's point, which is it's about feeling like there is something that is bigger than just you. You are important to a whole community, a whole ecosystem of cooperatives, and what you do matters. And actually, in the bad times, that is even more important. So the cooperative bank is really, really important to me personally. It's really important to our customers. And actually, yes, the name's important, but it's about what the name stands for. And what it stands for is values and ethics and believing in something bigger than just the functional thing that you're there to do. I think that's probably where we still stand.
That's fair. Amanda, with everything that happened in Rochdale, was there any talk of a rebrand?
We explored it, for sure. I think when I arrived, people were saying to me, you know, when you kind of don't really know enough to make a decision, you need to rebrand this organisation. But my view on it was, what we need to do is build back the brand. Rochdale, I'm still learning about Rochdale, and Rochdale has several identities. So if you say you live in Rochdale, you live in Rochdale, but then there's Middleton and Haywood, which don't always associate with Rochdale. So the Boroughwide part of our name was really, really important to go, we're here for all of those communities. It was never my decision to make, it was never the board's decision to make. So we talked to the membership, we talked to our stakeholders, and it was really split around, it's a toxic brand, you need to get rid of it, to, no, you need to keep it and make it better. So we're keeping it, and we've made it better. Will we modernise? I remember at the start, like the cartoons, our logo was kind of this thing that had a thumbprint in the corner, and it just didn't mean anything. So we sharpened it up and we made it a little bit more modern, and we've changed the strapline on it. But fundamentally, we will be RBH because it's an important brand that people associate with. And actually, we're 13 years past our transfer now, and people still think that they live in a home owned by the council, so we've still got work to do on that. So just keeping that identity and having that continuity is really, really important. But the work that we did on reframing our values that underpin our brand has been really important and really powerful, because the brand has to mean something. So we're not going to do that.
Just like one more question about Iwabi Shack, because obviously that story was so central. And I know part of your recovery, you've been leaning into that a little bit, but there is a balancing act there because you don't want to take advantage of that story or lean on the family either.
No. I have been absolutely purposeful around the fact that we will always own our past. So the first day, the first media interview, to the media interviews that I do today, we own our past. We know what happened. We will never not talk about what happened, because it's a really important point in time. But equally, and I think when you go to conferences, the thing that upsets me more than anything is that people have used Iwabi Shack's image and name to try and in a commercial way, and that's not okay. So you see people who have got the best damp and mould solutions in the world with Iwabi Shack's picture there, and that really bothers me, because actually he was a human being with a mum and a dad and now has 2 sisters. So we don't use his image anymore, and that's not because we don't own our past, it's because we have to be respectful that this family needed to move on, and needed to move on without all of that being, it's 6 years nearly since Iwabi Shack died. So we will always own our past, but we are a different organisation now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, all 3 of you. It's been a really, really interesting session. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so we might have time for maybe 2 questions if anyone has anything burning to ask. I can see any questions. There's one at the back. Sorry, it's really bright, I can't see.
Hi, my name's Mark Thorley. This is absolutely fascinating, the way your organisations have kind of, I don't know, come back from an existential crisis, come out stronger, and kind of gone back to your values and ethics and stuff like that. So my question, I guess, is a relatively simple one, is that given what's going on globally, where I think it's fair to say ethics and, you know, human values are being challenged in a way that they haven't been for a long time, do you feel a responsibility and a role for you to kind of say there's a different way of doing things and you can run businesses ethically and better values, and you know, do you feel a role and a responsibility to kind of shine that light globally?
Do you feel as a responsibility as a cooperative to share the cooperative difference with your values and principles, given everything that's happening on in the world?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think as a movement, we are outward facing. We are about recognising the challenges that our members, the people out there actually face. And I think you are absolutely right to call out that the challenges that we are now facing collectively, whether it be climate change or the breakdown of the sort of the world order right now, the sort of concerns that people have about peace and security, all of those things are the types of issues that are of concern to our members globally. But I would also say as well as our members are equally concerned about what's happening domestically in terms of their own communities and both from a economic cost of living perspective, but also from a social cohesion perspective as well. These are the sorts of things that our members are concerned about, and I know all of our organisations, certainly mine, Co-operative Bank, I'm sure locally RBH, see their role as being trying to address the things that matter to people. And along with the day-to-day pressures of life, what's happening in the wider world is something that our co-op members have always concerned about. So yes, I very much agree that it is something for us to be concerned about.
If I can jump in here as well, just really quickly, I think on the international stage, this is a fascinating thing that's happening too. So I know the International Cooperative Alliance, which is the global federation for co-ops, they've got a global conference happening in Panama in September, and their theme is all focused around building bridges and about building peace. And I know during the International Supper, there's going to be a conversation around what's happening with the ICA's CM50, which is the Co-operative Mutuals 50, which brings together some of the world's largest cooperative and mutual organisations, including the group, including our co-op. I know, Rose, you're involved as a ICA director as well, looking at how bigger businesses can do that more outward-facing piece as well. So that's just a point of interest.
I think Russell summed it up beautifully, but I couldn't agree more that this is, and the whole point of Cooperative Congress is this is about externally stepping up our message. So, you know, it's brilliant to be able to sit here and say we've come through these fantastic, you know, tremendous crises and we've come out the other side. But actually there's a more important part here, which is we need to make sure that we live the cooperative values that we talk about. We should only be cooperating with each other. We should be amplifying each other's messages. We should be encouraging our members to be each other's members. We should be, what we've learned through these crises is that working together with like-minded people can create really brilliant things. And actually, if Co-op Congress has got one message, it's that we need to do more of it.
Cooperate and you can change the world.
Indeed. I think that some of the things that are happening in the kind of geopolitical sphere, we have a duty to understand how they impact on the people who live in our homes and our communities at a really hyper-local level, because that's where it's being felt. Social cohesion is a huge issue at the moment. The political shifts that happened a little over a month ago are testament to that. And I think our cooperative values are really important in terms of really understanding what we stand for and how we represent those communities that we serve. So that's all I would add to what others have said, really.
Brill, thank you so much for being fantastic panellists. It is now time for lunch, and I think Rose is going to close us off, but can I just join me and say thank you to our panel? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your leadership. It's not easy being a cooperative leader on many occasions, and it does take strength and it does take resilience, but it does take solidarity of all the movements. So thank you so much. Not always easy conversations, but they are essential if we're serious about our model being trusted and facing into these matters. So yes, we are now breaking for lunch, which is in the exhibitors area. So do use this time to meet with the exhibitors and other cooperatives. But also, just to be aware, at 1:15 in the lunchtime, there is a breakout conversation with the Cooperative Bank, who will be going through more changes over the next year or so, and are keen to talk to customers about what that means for them. So that will be the Cooperative Bank with the Customer Union for ethical banking, and we hope some of the Cooperative Bank customers, if you can join at 1:15, it is in your programme. So we've got a nice long lunch with that in the middle. We'll be back in the main room at 2 15, and we've also got a very exciting announcement from Social Enterprise UK after lunch, so we'll see you back in here. Thank you.